Bullshit.
It's the No BS Marketing Show. I'm Dave Mastovich, CEO and founder of Massolutions, the world's only no bullshit marketing firm. Today, I had the privilege of sitting in on a workshop with a fellow Vistage speaker, Gustavo Granitsky, and he had his talk discussing how we now have 5 generations working together in the workplace. This brought me back some memories of one of my blogs way back in 2008 about getting Gen Y from A to Z, and that'll be referenced in the show notes. But I started talking about it way back then about how we had to adjust, and my writings and speaking and videos on generations have stuck to a lot of what Gustavo covered in his great workshop today. I call it the generation trap from a communication standpoint and a storytelling standpoint. And the generation trap is that we hear all these things about each different generation, but we then make the generalization of the generation when we're all a product of our environment, not just generationally, but also parenting and who taught us growing up and our coaches, teachers, so forth, our first job, our bosses, and so forth. The generation trap is when we begin to market and communicate and tell stories in a way that we think fits those stereotypes of the generations. What Gustavo and I agree completely on is that we have to take what we know about how we as humans have natural needs, behaviors, and drives, and how the major influences that impacted us, the major crises, 9/11, World War I, World War II, for each generation, and some of the major trends that were going on, and see how those helped impact a generation, and combine that to communicate and tell stories in a way that maximizes the message for the recipient and motivates and educates. I talk a lot about how stories have to motivate and educate, and we can motivate and educate each generation just slightly differently by tweaking slightly how we convey to them and communicate to them so we can meet them where they are. One of the cliches that you hear so much nowadays, meet them where they are. Well, you can do that. You can meet them where they are by crafting good stories that resonate based on the major tenets of storytelling. The major tenets of less is more, the major tenets of make it memorable, making an emotional impact. But the behavioral science should drive the creative art. The behavioral science should drive your B2E storytelling. The behavioral science can include things like predictive index or Myers-Briggs, so you understand each individual more about their needs and behaviors. The behavioral science can include digging deeply and doing a deep dive and listening to people like Gustavo as they break down what the unique needs, behaviors, drives, things that impacted each generation and how each generation communicates and how each generation prioritizes and what their values are. Combine that with the behavioral science of something like predictive index or Myers-Briggs. Combine that with that segmentation that I talked about. And what I really liked about Gustavo today is he talked about the cuspers, the people that are on the cusp within 3 to 5 years of the previous generation. Think about that. If you're within 3 to 5 years of that previous generation, what ends up happening is you tend to be situational and sometimes have the behaviors of the previous generation and the current generation. If you're right in the middle, you're probably going to be more dominant with the tendencies of that generation. That's at the heart of segmentation. The 4, 5, 6 segmentation model focuses on using 4 different types of reasons that makes a variable effective and that makes a variable usable. The 5 types of variables, and then drilling down into 6 variables. But also using the Pareto Principle Plus and profit segmentation and the BCG matrix. But by using all of these things as part of the Massolutions, the 4, 5, 6 segmentation model, you're able to look within a generation and slice and dice that cusp part of that generation at the beginning and the tail end of that generation. So really appreciated Gustavo's comments on that. We talked about we need to have discretionary time off. That's what Gustavo broke down. And he mentioned a great phrase. The corporate ladder is gone. It's the corporate lattice. The corporate ladder is gone. It's the corporate lattice. No longer is it vertical and narrow. It's now horizontal and wide. And the corporate lattice is that you take people and help them get the most experience and knowledge and learning that they can by doing different things and experiencing different parts of your organization. I was excited because we've strived to do that at Massolutions for over a decade. Can do a lot better, have to do a lot better. But when we're out talking to new recruits, new no BSers, potential new no BSers, we talk a lot about how you're going to get to experience the flatness of this organization, the good and bad of it. The good that you're going to learn so much and experience so much, and maybe it's something you won't like as much as that you kind of got to jump in and make things work and get it to the deadline. A lot of times you'll like that, but sometimes it'll bother you. So corporate lattice instead of corporate ladder. Just overall, a tremendous workshop by a fellow Vistage speaker, Dr. Gustavo Grunitsky. A shout out to him and a shout out to you as a loyal no BSer that you've heard me talk about the generation trap. You've heard me talk about how to market to and segment within each of the 5 generations. You can get more information about Gustavo's talk, more information about my talks and my podcasts and my writings. But it's all about us listening and learning and observing and getting better at communicating with each other and across generations, being respectful of each of our needs and drives and what makes us tick. Thanks for listening to another episode of the No BS Marketing Show, recorded here in our studio, The Lair, in bold, beautiful downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Remember, ask yourself, what's the big idea? And build your story around the answer. It's all about bold solutions, no BS.